The old janitor was just polishing the last of the brass lettering on the company nameplate when the arrogant young CEO stormed out of the elevator, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're fired. Get your things and get out," he sneered, not knowing the man he just dismissed held the power to ruin him completely. The janitor simply nodded, a quiet storm brewing in his eyes, and walked away, leaving the CEO to his fate. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The city of Vantage sprawled below, a glittering tapestry of light and shadow woven into the fabric of the night. From the 40th floor of the Vance Innovations Tower, the view was breathtaking, a god's-eye perspective of the world. But down in the lobby, the universe was contained within the sweep of a mop and the scent of lemon polish. The vast cathedral-like space was a monument to modern success, its floors a polished expanse of imported Italian marble so reflective they held a perfect, upside-down image of the city outside. Towering glass walls, supported by gleaming steel beams, reached for the 3-story ceiling, creating an atmosphere of cold, sterile grandeur. It was a space designed to intimidate, to make visitors feel small in the face of such corporate might. Yet, in the profound silence of the late hour, long after the last employee had clicked their heels across the echoing floor, the lobby belonged to one man, Anthony Coleman. Anthony, a man whose late 50s were etched into the gentle lines around his eyes and the silver threading his temples, moved with a quiet, unhurried grace. His hands, though calloused and worn from decades of labor, were surprisingly deft as he worked. He wore a simple, gray janitor's uniform, impeccably clean and pressed, a testament to the pride he took in every aspect of his life, no matter how small. Tonight, his focus was on the company's brass nameplate, a massive, ostentatious declaration of Vance Innovations that adorned the wall behind the vacant security desk. He wasn't just cleaning it, he was tending to it, his cloth moving in slow, deliberate circles, coaxing a warm, golden gleam from the metal. Each letter was a testament to a dream he had once shared, a secret he held close to his chest like a prayer. The silence of the building was his companion, a stark contrast to the frenetic, almost chaotic energy that pulsed through its veins during the day. He could feel the building breathe around him, its metallic lungs humming with the low thrum of servers and ventilation systems. He knew its every secret sound, every creak of its settling foundation, every whisper of the wind against its glass skin. He had been there from the beginning, long before the marble and the brass, and his presence was as much a part of the foundation as the concrete and steel. A sharp, intrusive ding shattered the tranquility. The polished silver doors of the main elevator slid open, and Derek Vance, the CEO, strode out as if he were conquering new territory. In his early 40s, Derek was the very picture of new money arrogance, handsome in a severe, angular way, and dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Anthony's car. He had a phone pressed to his ear, his voice a sharp, abrasive bark that ricocheted off the marble and glass, defiling the lobby's quiet sanctity. "No, you listen to me," he snapped into the device, his words clipped and devoid of any warmth. "I don't care what the projections say. We launch on Friday. It's a power move. It shows confidence." He paced as he talked, his expensive leather shoes making sharp, angry sounds against the floor. He didn't so much as glance at Anthony, who had paused in his work, his cloth held still over the final S in innovations. To Derek, Anthony was just part of the scenery, a piece of furniture that happened to move. He was the new generation, a tech bro who had inherited an empire and believed he had built it. He was all about profit, ego, and the relentless, soulless pursuit of more. Derek ended his call with a final, dismissive grunt and shoved the phone into his pocket. His eyes, cold and gray as a winter sky, swept across the lobby, not with appreciation for its beauty, but with the critical gaze of a man perpetually searching for flaws. And, of course, he found one, a small, almost invisible smudge on the massive glass entrance door, likely left by a departing employee hours ago. It was nothing, a fleeting imperfection in a sea of polished perfection, but to Derek, it was a personal affront. He scoffed, a short, ugly sound of derision. His gaze then shifted, landing on Anthony for the first time. He didn't see a man. He saw a problem. He saw inefficiency. He saw a relic. He strode toward the janitor, his posture radiating an aggressive, unearned authority. He stopped directly in front of Anthony, forcing the older man to look up. Derek pointed a manicured finger toward the glass door. "Is this what you call clean?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "I could write my name in the filth on this door." His tone was designed to belittle, to strip away dignity. Anthony's expression remained placid, his eyes calm and steady. He had encountered men like Derek Vance many times in his life, men who confused power with importance and wealth with worth. He slowly straightened up, the slight ache in his lower back a familiar reminder of a long night's work. "I was just getting to that, Mr. Vance," he replied, his voice a low, even baritone that seemed to absorb the CEO's harshness. "I like to work from the top down. The floors are last." It was a simple, logical explanation, the process of a professional who knew his craft. But Derek wasn't interested in logic. He was interested in asserting dominance. "Excuses," he spat, waving a dismissive hand. "I see you leaning on your mop more than you use it. You're a relic, old man." The words were like stones thrown with casual cruelty. "This is a fast-paced company. A shark tank. We don't have room for dead weight." He leaned in closer, his cologne, a sharp, citrusy scent, invading Anthony's space. "Maybe it's time we found someone who can keep up." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of hurt crossed Anthony's face. It was an old wound, the sting of being judged and found wanting based on nothing more than the uniform he wore. He thought of his late wife, Martha, and how she always told him his quiet strength was his greatest asset. He thought of the promises he had made, the legacy he had helped build within these very walls. The hurt was there, a dull ache in his chest, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something harder and more resilient. A steely resolve settled in his eyes, a quiet fire that Derek, in his blind arrogance, completely failed to see. Anthony had weathered worse storms than this petulant boy king. He had faced down bankruptcy, stared into the abyss of failure, and emerged stronger. He had seen men like Derek before, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. He simply held the CEO's gaze, his silence a more powerful response than any words he could have uttered. The contrast between them was stark, a chasm between two different worlds. There was the cold, sterile opulence of the corporate machine, embodied by the impeccably dressed, morally bankrupt CEO. And then there was Anthony's warm, human presence, a quiet island of dignity in a sea of ambition. The injustice of the moment was a palpable thing, a bitter taste in the air. Derek saw a janitor, a disposable cog in his grand machine. He had no idea he was speaking to the man who had laid the very first stone of his empire. The threat of firing him was meant to be the final word, a demonstration of absolute power. But as Anthony stood there, his resolve hardening into something unbreakable, it was clear this was not an ending. It was just the beginning. The weight of the CEO's threat was a familiar burden, one Anthony had carried in different forms throughout his life. But this was different. This was not just an attack on his livelihood, it was a desecration of a memory. As Derek Vance's sharp, angry footsteps faded, Anthony's gaze drifted back to the gleaming brass nameplate. Vance Innovations. The name echoed in the silent lobby, a ghost of a promise made in a cramped, dusty office a lifetime ago. The polished metal seemed to ripple, the reflection of the modern, sterile lobby dissolving into a memory, warm and smelling of stale coffee and boundless ambition. The year was 1988. The office wasn't a cathedral of glass and steel, but a small, rented room above a laundromat, the rhythmic rumble of the machines below a constant, comforting hum. The air was thick with the smell of paper, ink, and the nervous energy of two men betting their futures on a single idea. A younger Anthony Coleman, his face unlined and his hair a solid, deep black, stood beside a man with a wild shock of sandy hair and eyes that burned with a feverish, creative light. This was Arthur Vance, Derek's father, a brilliant engineer with a dreamer's soul and a salesman's charm, but with pockets as empty as his grand pronouncements were full. He wore a rumpled shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and he paced the small room like a caged tiger. Spread across a rickety folding table were not architectural models, but complex circuit diagrams and blueprints for a revolutionary data compression algorithm that existed only in Arthur's mind and on those scattered papers. "It's over, Tony," Arthur sighed, slumping into a chair that groaned in protest. He ran a hand through his already chaotic hair, his shoulders sagging with the weight of a dozen rejection letters from banks and venture capitalists. They don't see it. They see the risk, the numbers that don't add up. They don't see the future. He gestured to a pile of red-stamped final notice bills on the corner of the table. The landlord wants us out by the 1st. The patent filing fee is due. We're sunk. Anthony didn't respond immediately. He walked over to the single grimy window that overlooked a rain-slicked alley. He wasn't looking at the bleak view, but inward, at the landscape of his own life. He was a man of modest means, a supervisor at a downtown post office, a job he'd held for 20 years. He had a wife, Martha, a small house, and a savings account he had painstakingly built, dollar by dollar, for their future, for a rainy day. Looking at Arthur's defeated face, he knew the storm had arrived. He believed in Arthur. He believed in the scribbles on those papers, in the frantic, brilliant energy that poured from his friend. He believed that true innovation didn't come from boardrooms, but from rooms exactly like this. He turned from the window, his expression calm and resolute. He reached into the inner pocket of his simple suit jacket and pulled out a checkbook. He sat down opposite Arthur, the rickety table shaking as he wrote. The only sound was the scratch of the pen and the distant rumble from the laundromat. He tore the check from the book and slid it across the table. Arthur stared at it, his eyes slowly widening. The numbers were written in Anthony's neat, careful script. $100,000. It was Anthony's entire life savings. "Tony, I can't take this," Arthur whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This is everything you have." "No," Anthony said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's everything we have. It's a start. I'm not giving you a loan, Arthur. I'm buying in. I'm your partner." He extended his hand across the table. 20%. For the seed that will grow the forest. Arthur looked from the check to Anthony's steady gaze, and for the first time in weeks, the frantic light in his eyes softened into one of profound gratitude and renewed hope. He grasped Anthony's hand, his grip like iron. "A forest, Tony," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "We'll build a forest." The memory faded, the warm glow of the past receding, leaving Anthony standing once more in the cold, cavernous lobby. The nameplate gleamed under the recessed lighting, a monument built on that handshake. A quiet sadness settled over him. Arthur had passed away a decade ago, leaving the empire they had built to a son who understood its value but not its worth. His shift was ending. As he pushed his cart of supplies toward the service elevator, he passed a small, brightly lit alcove of cubicles where a few dedicated, or perhaps terrified, employees still worked. In one of them, a young woman was hunched over a keyboard, the glow of her monitor casting a pale blue light on her tired face. This was Maria, an intern in the marketing department. She was sharp, ambitious, and one of the few people who ever looked at Anthony and saw a person rather than a function. She often worked late, fueled by a potent combination of determination and insecurity. She looked up as he approached, rubbing her eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman," she said, offering a small, weary smile. "Burning the midnight oil again, Maria?" Anthony asked, his voice gentle. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the faint tremor of exhaustion in her hands. She sighed, gesturing helplessly at the screen, which was filled with charts and graphs. "Mr. Vance wants a new projection analysis for the Chimera launch by 8 a.m. The numbers they're not cooperating." She lowered her voice, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Honestly, the whole project feels like a gamble. Everyone in the department thinks so, but nobody dares to say it. Mr. Vance is so demanding. I don't know if I'm cut out for this." Anthony leaned against his cart, his presence steady and reassuring. He looked at the young woman, seeing in her the same spark of earnest, hopeful energy he had seen in Arthur all those years ago. It was a spark Derek was trying his best to extinguish. "Don't let him get to you," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "A man who has to shout to be heard has nothing important to say. You just focus on your work. Report the numbers as they are, clearly and honestly. That's your job. And believe in yourself. You've got a good head on your shoulders. Better than most." Maria's eyes welled up with a surprising rush of gratitude. In the cutthroat culture of Vance Innovations, where praise was scarce and pressure was abundant, his simple words of encouragement were a lifeline. "Thank you, Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Really?" He simply nodded, a small, kind smile touching his lips, and continued on his way, leaving her feeling a little stronger, a little more seen. He, however, felt a growing sense of dread. Maria's words confirmed what he had been observing from the periphery for months. The company, his company, was being steered toward an iceberg by a captain who was convinced he could command the ocean itself. The next afternoon, in the main boardroom on the 41st floor, Derek's recklessness was on full display. The room was the antithesis of the original office, a symphony of polished mahogany, black leather, and state-of-the-art technology. Derek stood at the head of the massive table, radiating impatience. Seated around him were his senior executives, men and women in their 50s and 60s, veterans of the industry who had been hired by his father. They were the steady hands, the voices of caution and experience. "The data from the beta tests is inconclusive," said a silver-haired man named George, the chief financial officer. He had been with the company for 25 years. "The market penetration simulations show a potential for catastrophic loss if the initial adoption rate is below 12%, and right now we're tracking at 7. It's too risky, Derek. We need to postpone the launch of Project Chimera." Derek scoffed, waving his hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. 7, 12, 20. They're just numbers, George. Numbers are for accountants. I operate on vision, on instinct. He began to pace, his movements sharp and theatrical. "Project Chimera is a game changer. It will redefine the industry and put our competitors in the grave. My father built this company by taking risks." "Arthur took calculated risks," corrected Eleanor, the chief operating officer, her voice sharp. "He listened to his team." "This isn't calculated, Derek. This is a Hail Mary pass in the first quarter. The technology is unstable. The marketing is based on promises we can't guarantee we'll keep. If we launch now and it fails, the fallout won't just hurt our stock price. It could trigger a covenant breach with our creditors. We could lose the company." The warning, stark and terrifying, hung in the air. The other executives nodded in grim agreement. They had all seen the same alarming data. They all felt the same cold knot of fear in their stomachs. Derek stopped pacing and fixed Eleanor with a glare so cold it could have frozen water. "Fear," he said, his voice low and menacing. "That's all I hear from this table. The tired, timid whispers of people who have lost their nerve." He leaned forward, his palms flat on the polished table. "My father's legacy was not to maintain, it was to conquer, and I will not let his vision be strangled by your cowardice." His gaze swept across the faces of the seasoned professionals who had helped build the very chair he sat in. "The launch is Friday. That is final. You will all fall in line, or you can clear out your desks. There are 1,000 hungry young lions out there who would kill for your jobs." The room fell into a stunned, defeated silence. It was not a discussion. It was a decree. George slumped back in his chair, his face pale. Eleanor stared at Derek, her expression a mixture of fury and despair. They saw it clearly now. The son was not the father. The son was a gambler, high on ego and drunk on power, willing to bet the entire kingdom on a single reckless spin of the wheel. As the meeting adjourned and the dejected executives filed out, Anthony was on the other side of the building, carefully cleaning the windows in an empty office, watching the first drops of an afternoon rain begin to streak the glass. He couldn't hear the words spoken in the boardroom, but he could feel the tremor of their impact. He saw it in the grim set of George's jaw as the CFO walked past, and in the unshed tears of frustration in Eleanor's eyes. The weight of his secret felt heavier than ever, a quiet ticking bomb of knowledge in a company that was already on the verge of blowing itself apart. The storm that Anthony had sensed gathering on the horizon was no longer a distant threat. It was a tempest, breaking directly over Vance Innovations. The tremors from the disastrous board meeting radiated through the executive wing, creating an atmosphere thick with fear and resentment. That evening, long after Derek had stormed out of the boardroom, two figures remained, silhouetted against the panoramic view of the rain-lashed city. George, the CFO, and Eleanor, the COO, stood by the window, the polished mahogany table reflecting their grim expressions like a dark, still lake. They were the old guard, the keepers of Arthur Vance's original vision, and they were watching it being dismantled piece by piece. He's going to bankrupt us, George said, his voice barely a whisper. He loosened his tie, a gesture of defeat. The numbers for Chimera are a fantasy. The burn rate is unsustainable, and the market is already showing signs of a downturn. Launching now isn't a power move, it's suicide. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, her gaze fixed on the city below. It's not about the numbers for him, George. It never has been. It's about exorcising his father's ghost. He's so desperate to prove he's better, bigger, more ruthless, that he's willing to burn the entire kingdom to the ground just to feel the warmth of the flames. She turned to face him, her eyes flashing with a frustration that had been simmering for months. We have to do something. The shareholders' meeting is in 2 weeks. If he stands up on that stage and sells them this bill of goods, and the launch fails as we know it will, we're all finished. The liability will be enormous. George ran a hand over his tired face. What can we do? He's the CEO and the majority shareholder. The board is stacked with his yes men, cronies who are more interested in their stock options than the long-term health of this company. We're outgunned. We can present our data, we can voice our concerns, but he'll just steamroll us, call us cowards, and do exactly what he wants. He's a tyrant in a tailored suit. The word hung in the air between them, ugly and true. They were trapped, senior executives with decades of experience, rendered powerless by the unchecked ego of one man. There has to be a way, Eleanor insisted, her voice low and intense. There are other major shareholders. If we could get to them, show them the real data, the unvarnished projections, maybe we could form a coalition, a vote of no confidence. It's a long shot, George countered, shaking his head. Most of the institutional investors just want to see the stock price go up. They're seduced by his charisma, his talk of game, changing disruption. They don't want to hear about risk mitigation and responsible growth. It's not sexy enough. He let out a humorless laugh. Arthur must be spinning in his grave. He built this place on integrity, on making a product that worked, that helped people. Derek is building a house of cards on a foundation of lies. Their conversation was a funeral dirge for the company they loved. They knew the upcoming shareholders' meeting was the final battlefield. Derek's leadership would be under scrutiny, but with his charisma and control over the narrative, he was likely to emerge unscathed, his mandate renewed, free to steer the ship directly into the iceberg. As they spoke, they were unaware of the quiet janitor on the floor below, the one man who held the power to change everything, the silent partner whose existence had been forgotten by all but the dusty pages of the company's founding documents. The storm was gathering, and its first victim would not be a high-flying executive, but the humblest of the company's employees. The pressure was getting to Derek. The resistance from his senior staff, though ultimately futile, had infuriated him. He felt their judgment, their silent disapproval, and it gnawed at him. He paced his penthouse office like a caged predator, the city lights a cold, indifferent audience to his mounting rage. He needed to reassert his authority, to make an example, to remind everyone in the building, from the boardroom to the mailroom, who was in charge. He needed a scapegoat, someone whose dismissal would send a ripple of fear through the workforce, silencing any potential dissent. His opportunity arrived just after 2 a.m. He was on his way down to the lobby, intending to take his sports car for a furious, late-night drive to burn off his frustration. As the elevator doors opened, his eyes swept the vast, empty space and landed on Anthony Coleman. The old janitor was sitting on a small stool tucked away in a discreet corner, a thermos in one hand and a half-eaten sandwich in the other. He was taking a short break, a few minutes past his officially allotted time, a minor infraction in the grand scheme of things, but to Derek, in his current state of mind, it was a flagrant act of rebellion. He saw not a man taking a well-deserved rest after hours of physical labor, but a symbol of everything he despised: laziness, inefficiency, a lack of drive. He saw dead weight. He strode across the marble floor, his footsteps echoing like gunshots in the silence. Anthony heard him coming and began to pack away his modest meal, preparing to get back to work. He looked up, his expression calm, as the CEO came to a halt before him. Derek didn't bother with a greeting. His face was a mask of fury. "That's it!" he snarled, his voice cracking like a whip. "I've had enough of your laziness." He pointed a trembling finger at Anthony, his whole body radiating a toxic rage. "I come down here at all hours, And every single time, I see you resting, leaning, doing anything but your job. This is a place of work, not a retirement home." Anthony slowly rose to his feet, his movements deliberate and unhurried, a stark contrast to Derek's vibrating intensity. He met the CEO's furious gaze without flinching. Before he could offer a word in his own defense, Derek cut him off. "You're fired," he shouted, the words echoing through the cavernous lobby. He seemed to swell with the power of the declaration, his anger finding its release. "Get your things and get out, now." The finality of the words was absolute. The injustice was breathtaking. Fired for taking a 5-minute break. Fired for being old. Fired for being a convenient target for a powerful man's tantrum. A lesser man might have argued, pleaded, or cursed. Anthony did none of these things. He simply held Derek's gaze for a long moment, and in the depths of his calm, steady eyes, there was not fear, but a profound and unsettling pity. He saw a boy playing king, a hollow man so consumed by his own insecurities that he had to tear others down to feel tall. "As you wish, Mr. Vance," Anthony said, his voice quiet, yet carrying a weight that seemed to momentarily stun the CEO into silence. There was no argument, no begging, no satisfying display of fear or anger for Derek to feed on. Anthony's calm acceptance was more unnerving than any outburst could have been. He turned his back on the CEO and walked toward the small janitorial closet that had served as his locker for over a decade. Derek stood there, momentarily deflated, his victory feeling strangely hollow. He had expected a fight, a plea, something to validate his show of power. Instead, he got quiet dignity, a response so alien to his own nature that he couldn't comprehend it. He watched, a frown creasing his brow, as Anthony began to calmly pack his few belongings. The closet was small, containing little more than cleaning supplies and the faint, lingering scent of bleach and lemon polish. Anthony's personal effects were few, stored on a single shelf. He carefully took down a worn, dog-eared paperback copy of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. Its spine was cracked, its pages filled with his own pencil annotations, a testament to a lifetime of quiet study. It was the book that had first taught him about capital, labor, and the true nature of value, principles he had shared with Arthur Vance all those years ago. Next to it was a small, silver-plated frame, which he polished with his thumb before placing it gently into his small canvas bag. It held a faded photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes, his late wife, Martha. She was the one who had encouraged his strange friendship with the eccentric inventor, who had believed in their shared dream, and who had held his hand the day he wrote the check that changed their lives forever. These were his treasures, the sum of a life of hard work, love, and quiet intellectual curiosity. As he closed his bag, he was aware of a presence nearby. Maria, the young intern, stood a few feet away, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. She had been working late again and had witnessed the entire brutal exchange from her cubicle. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of anger at the injustice and sadness for the kind old man who had shown her more respect than the company's own CEO. Anthony walked out of the closet and paused in front of her. He offered her a small, sad smile. He didn't need to say anything. His expression conveyed it all: the disappointment, the acceptance, the quiet resolve. He gave her a slight nod, a silent farewell, and in that shared look, a torch was passed. Maria's sadness hardened into a steely determination. She was a witness. She knew what had happened was wrong, and the fire of youthful idealism, which this company had tried so hard to extinguish, now burned brighter than ever. With his bag in hand, Anthony walked toward the massive glass doors he had just finished cleaning. He didn't look back at Derek, who was still standing in the middle of the lobby, a solitary, diminished figure in his own cathedral of wealth. The injustice of the moment was a palpable thing, a poison seeping into the polished marble floors. For Derek, it was a minor administrative task completed, a piece of dead weight jettisoned. He felt a fleeting sense of satisfaction, the bully's brief triumph. He was completely oblivious to the fact that he hadn't just fired a janitor. He had fired his co-founder. He had severed the last living link to his father's integrity. And he had just lit the fuse on a bomb that would detonate in the one place he felt most secure, the upcoming shareholders meeting. The quiet dignity of Anthony's departure was not an act of surrender, it was a declaration of war. The annual shareholders meeting for Vance Innovations was an exercise in carefully orchestrated corporate theater. The main boardroom, a cavernous space on the top floor, was designed to inspire awe and confidence. A single, colossal table made from a slab of polished obsidian dominated the room, surrounded by 24 black leather chairs that whispered expensively when occupied. One entire wall was a floor, ceiling window, offering a dizzying, panoramic view of the city, a testament to the company's lofty position in the world. Today, the room was filled with the quiet rustle of expensive suits and the low murmur of anticipation. The shareholders, a formidable collection of wealthy private investors, stone-faced institutional representatives, and a few nervous board members, sat with their leather-bound portfolios open before them, their expressions ranging from hopeful to deeply skeptical. At the head of the room, standing at a sleek, minimalist lectern, was Derek Vance. He was in his element, a shark in a tank of his own design. He was dressed in a charcoal, gray suit that fit him like a second skin, and he spoke with a practiced, easy charisma that had, in the past, proven remarkably effective at soothing concerns and generating excitement. He was painting a masterpiece of corporate jargon, a vision of the future built on buzzwords and hollow promises. And so, with the launch of Project Chimera, we are not just entering a new market, we are creating it, he declared, his voice resonating with manufactured passion. He gestured toward a large screen behind him, which displayed a swirling, abstract animation of data streams. This is about synergy. It's about disruption. It's about leveraging our core competencies to achieve a paradigm shift in user engagement. The projections you see are not just numbers, they are a roadmap to unprecedented growth, a future where Vance Innovations is not just a leader, but the undisputed king. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He scanned the faces in the room, his gaze lingering for a moment on George and Eleanor. He saw their grim, unconvinced expressions and felt a surge of defiant anger. They were dinosaurs, relics of his father's cautious era. He would show them. He would show them all. In the back of the room, almost hidden behind a large potted plant, Maria sat on a folding chair reserved for junior staff. She had used her connection to Eleanor's assistant to get access, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a desperate, flickering hope. She clutched her tablet, which contained the real, unvarnished data on Project Chimera, a stark contrast to the fantasy Derek was spinning. Derek was building to his crescendo, his voice rising in volume and intensity. My father built this company on a foundation of innovation. I am here to build a skyscraper on that foundation, a monument to progress that will touch the clouds. The future is not something we wait for, it is something we seize. And with your continued confidence, we will not just seize it, we will own it. Just as the final triumphant word left his lips, the grand double doors at the far end of the boardroom swung silently, smoothly open. The timing was so perfect it felt scripted. Every head in the room turned. The spell Derek had been weaving was shattered. Standing in the doorway was a figure that, for a moment, nobody recognized. It was a man in his late 50s, his posture erect, and his presence commanding a quiet, immediate respect. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple, elegant silk tie. His silver, threaded hair was neatly combed, and his dark eyes, calm and intelligent, swept across the room, taking in every detail, every shocked face. He exuded an aura of profound confidence, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. It was the quiet authority of a man who knows his own worth, a stark contrast to the loud, brittle arrogance that Derek had just put on display. Derek squinted, his charismatic smile faltering. The man looked vaguely familiar, but the context was all wrong. A security guard? A lost visitor from another floor? "Excuse me," Derek said, his voice tight with annoyance at the interruption. "This is a private meeting." The man in the doorway didn't respond to him. He didn't even look at him. His gaze was fixed on the chairman of the board, a portly balding man named Mr. Abernathy, who was seated at the center of the long table. With a slow, deliberate pace, Anthony Coleman began to walk the length of the boardroom. His polished leather shoes made almost no sound on the thick plush carpet. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy, expectant vacuum. The shareholders watched, mesmerized. Maria leaned forward, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. George and Eleanor exchanged a look of utter confusion. Anthony's journey across the room felt like an eternity. He walked with the unhurried grace of a man who owned the space he was in. He passed Derek at the lectern without a single glance, as if the CEO were nothing more than a piece of furniture. He stopped directly beside Mr. Abernathy's chair. From an inside pocket of his suit, he produced a slim, leather-bound file. He placed it gently on the obsidian table in front of the chairman. Mr. Abernathy looked from Anthony's calm, unreadable face to the file, a frown of confusion on his brow. He opened it. Inside were several documents, yellowed with age, covered in dense legal text and signatures. He began to read, his frown deepening. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. A strange sound, a small, choked gasp, escaped his lips. His face, normally a healthy pink, began to pale. His eyes, wide with shock, darted from the documents up to Anthony, then back down again. He looked as if he had just seen a ghost. He fumbled for his water glass, his hand trembling slightly. The entire room held its breath, watching the chairman's dramatic, silent reaction. Derek, who had been watching this bizarre interruption with growing fury, finally lost his patience. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice shrill. "Who is this man? Security?" Mr. Abernathy held up a shaking hand, silencing him. He looked around the table, his gaze landing on each shareholder, his expression one of profound, world-altering shock. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice raspy, as if he had forgotten how to speak. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have a significant oversight to address." He looked back at the file, then at the man standing patiently beside him. "This is Anthony Coleman." The name meant nothing to most people in the room, but it was the next sentence that sent a seismic shockwave through the corporate theater. "And according to these articles of incorporation, signed in 1988 by Arthur Vance, Mr. Coleman holds a 20% stake in this company." A collective gasp swept the room. A frantic, excited murmur erupted as shareholders turned to each other, their faces a mixture of confusion and astonishment. 20%. It was a colossal share, a kingmaker's portion, a stake large enough to shift the balance of power in an instant. Derek's face had gone white. He stared at Anthony, his mind refusing to process what he had just heard. He let out a short, hysterical laugh. "That's impossible!" he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the man in the sharp suit. That's the janitor. I fired him 2 weeks ago." The word janitor hung in the air, a testament to Derek's complete and utter humiliation. The murmuring in the room intensified, now laced with a dawning, delicious sense of scandal and irony. Anthony finally turned his head, his calm, steady gaze landing on Derek for the first time. The look in his eyes was not one of triumph or malice, but of a deep, profound disappointment, the look of a father witnessing the epic failure of a son. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried with an effortless authority that cut through the noise, silencing the room completely. "I was a janitor," Anthony said, his tone even and firm. Each word was delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, "but I was also your father's first partner." He let that statement sink in, watching the comprehension and the horror dawn on Derek's face. "I am the silent investor who provided the $100,000 that saved this company from ruin when every bank in this city had turned your father away." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the shareholders, the people who had profited from his long-ago act of faith. "My name is on the founding charter. My shares are valid, and I am here to reclaim my seat on this board." The finality of his declaration was absolute. It was not a request, it was a statement of fact. Derek's world, the world he had built on arrogance and inherited power, came crashing down around him in that single, stunning moment. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His face, just moments before flushed with charismatic pride, was now a slack, gray mask of utter devastation. The skyscraper he had boasted of building had just been leveled, its foundation ripped out from under it by the very man he had dismissed as dead weight. The quiet, dignified janitor had revealed himself to be the king, and the brash, arrogant CEO was left standing amidst the ruins of his own making, a fool exposed on the world's most unforgiving stage. The sense of vindication in the room was a palpable force, a silent, collective cheer for the underdog, for the quiet man who had finally, after decades of silence, come to claim what was his. The boardroom, a moment before a stage for corporate theater, was now a scene of pure, unadulterated chaos. Anthony's final words, a quiet declaration of ownership and intent, had detonated with the force of a bomb, and the fallout was instantaneous. Shareholders, who had been sitting in polite, skeptical rows, were now on their feet, a frantic, buzzing hive of activity. They crowded around the bewildered Mr. Abernathy, shouting questions, pointing at the aged documents in the leather file, their voices a cacophony of greed, excitement, and outrage. The institutional investors were already on their phones, their voices low and urgent as they relayed the seismic news to their firm. The power dynamic of Vance Innovations had not just shifted, it had been completely and irrevocably inverted in the space of 5 minutes. George and Eleanor, the two senior executives who had been bracing for corporate annihilation, stood frozen by their chairs, staring at Anthony as if he were an apparition. The quiet, dignified janitor they had exchanged pleasantries with for years, the man they had pitied, was their company's largest individual shareholder. The realization washed over them in waves, first confusion, then shock, then a dawning, almost hysterical sense of hope. It was a deus ex machina so improbable, so utterly perfect, that it felt like a dream. In the back of the room, Maria was no longer trying to hide her tears. They streamed down her face, tears of vindication for the man who had shown her kindness, and of relief for the company she had come to care about despite its toxic culture. But at the center of the storm, Derek Vance was a vacuum of silence. The world had dissolved into a meaningless roar. The faces of the shareholders were a blur, their voices a distant, buzzing sound. His charismatic smile was gone, replaced by a slack, gray mask of disbelief. His mind, usually so quick and ruthless, was a frantic, looping reel of denial. The janitor, the old man he had berated, humiliated, and fired, the man he had dismissed as a relic, as dead weight. That man was now his master. The irony was so crushing, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow, sucking the air from his lungs. He saw his reflection in the polished obsidian of the table, a distorted, pathetic figure, and he finally, truly, understood the meaning of the word ruin. 2 uniformed security guards, men he had probably passed 1,000 times without a glance, approached him. They were not aggressive, their movements were slow, respectful even, but their purpose was clear. One of them murmured, "Sir, perhaps it's best if we go." It wasn't a suggestion. Derek looked from the guard to Anthony, who was now calmly speaking with Mr. Abernathy, his presence a center of gravity in the swirling chaos. He looked for a sign of triumph in Anthony's eyes, a flicker of gloating, but he found none. There was only a quiet, profound sadness, which was, somehow, infinitely worse. The walk from the lectern to the boardroom doors was the longest of Derek's life. Every eye was on him, every whisper was about him. The man who had entered the room, a king, was leaving it a pariah, his reign over in a blaze of public humiliation. As the heavy doors closed behind him, sealing him out of the world he had once commanded, the sound of his own ragged breathing was the only thing he could hear. He was escorted not to his penthouse office, but to the service elevator, the same one Anthony had used for years. His reign at Vance Innovations was over. Inside the boardroom, Anthony watched him go, a heavy weight settling in his chest. There was no joy in this victory, only the grim satisfaction of a necessary, painful surgery having been completed. He had not come for revenge. He had come for restoration. He turned his attention back to the room. The chaos was beginning to subside as Mr. Abernathy, now looking to Anthony for every cue, called for order. Anthony walked slowly to the head of the table, to the chair that had been his father's, and then his own. It was Arthur's chair. He ran a hand over the smooth leather, a silent communion with his old friend. He did not sit immediately. He stood there, his quiet presence slowly but surely pulling the focus of every single person in the room. The frantic energy dissipated, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. They were all waiting to see what this ghost from the past, this janitor king, would do next. He looked at the faces around the table, the seasoned executives, the powerful investors, the shell-shocked board members. His gaze was steady, his expression unreadable. "My friend, Arthur Vance, built this company on 2 things," he began, his voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the room without effort. A brilliant idea and a foundation of integrity. The idea made us rich. The integrity was supposed to make us proud. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Somewhere along the way, that foundation has crumbled. He looked directly at George and Eleanor, a silent acknowledgement of their struggle. The first order of business is to restore integrity and respect to this company. We will honor the legacy of my friend, the original founder, and we will build a future based on sound principles, not reckless gambles. He finally pulled out the chair and sat down, the movement as natural as if he had been doing it every day for the past 30 years. The room was his. A new dawn for Vance Innovations had begun. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. The toxic, fear-based culture that Derek had cultivated began to dissipate, replaced by a tentative, then growing, sense of optimism. The first official act of the newly constituted board, with Anthony Coleman unanimously elected as chairman, was to formally and permanently scrap Project Chimera. The collective sigh of relief from the engineering and finance departments was almost audible. In its place, Anthony championed a new initiative, one based on a stable, proven technology that had been sidelined by Derek in favor of his flashier, riskier pet project. It was less glamorous, but it was solid, a move that signaled a return to the company's roots of quality and reliability. Anthony held a company-wide town hall meeting in the main atrium. He stood not on a stage but on the floor with his employees, a simple microphone in his hand. He didn't speak in buzzwords or corporate platitudes. He spoke from the heart. He told them about his years as a janitor, about the pride he took in a clean floor and a polished nameplate. He told them that every job in the company had dignity, that every employee was a vital part of the whole, from the boardroom to the mailroom. He announced the immediate reinstatement of the company's full tuition reimbursement program and a doubling of the budget for professional development. He was investing not in risky ventures, but in his people. The changes were not just philosophical, they were tangible. The exclusive executive dining room on the top floor, a symbol of the rigid hierarchy Derek had enforced, was converted into a collaborative workspace and library, open to all employees. The ostentatious, abstract art that Derek had spent millions on was quietly sold off. The proceeds used to fund a new employee bonus program tied not to individual performance, but to team-based success. An anonymous feedback portal was established, and to everyone's astonishment, Anthony himself read and responded to the suggestions, implementing changes that made people's daily work lives better. One afternoon, Maria received an email summoning her to the chairman's office. She walked into the vast space, the same office where Derek had once reigned, with a heart full of trepidation. The room was different now. The cold, minimalist furniture had been replaced with warmer, more comfortable pieces. The walls were adorned not with abstract art, but with framed copies of the company's original patents, and a large, black and white photograph of a young Arthur Vance and an even younger Anthony Coleman, standing proudly in their first tiny office. Anthony was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He turned and smiled as she entered. "Maria, please, come in. Sit down." He gestured to a chair opposite his desk. "I've been reading your performance reviews. They're exemplary. But more than that, I've been watching you. I see the way you interact with your colleagues. You listen. You encourage. You build people up." Maria felt a blush creep up her neck. "Thank you, sir. I'm creating a new department," Anthony continued, his expression serious but kind. "A department of employee development and corporate culture. Its only mission will be to ensure that Vance Innovations is the best possible place to work, that we are fostering talent, and that we are living up to the values we claim to hold. It's the most important department in this company, and I want you to run it." Maria was speechless. Her jaw literally dropped. "Me, sir? But I'm just an intern." "You were an intern," Anthony corrected gently. "Today, you are a director. I don't care about titles or time served. I care about character and potential. You have an abundance of both. Will you accept?" Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. It was a testament to the new, merit-based system, a powerful symbol of the change that had swept through the company. The age of the tyrant was over. The age of the mentor had begun. Several months passed. The autumn air grew crisp, and the leaves in the city parks turned to brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The company had stabilized. Under Anthony's steady leadership and the renewed vigor of its employees, Vance Innovations was slowly, surely turning around. The stock price was climbing, not with the wild, erratic spikes of Derek's tenure, but with a slow, confident ascent that spoke of genuine, sustainable growth. One Saturday afternoon, Anthony was taking a walk through a public park not far from his home. He enjoyed these quiet moments, a chance to think, to breathe, to simply be a man, not a chairman. As he rounded a bend in the path, he saw a crew from the city's sanitation department emptying trash cans. One of the workers, dressed in a standard, issue green vest, had his back to him. There was something about his posture, a slump in the shoulders that spoke of a profound weariness that caught Anthony's attention. The man turned, and Anthony's steps faltered. It was Derek. He was thinner, his face gaunt. The arrogant fire in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a dull, hollow emptiness. His hands, once manicured and soft, were now calloused and dirty. He saw Anthony and flinched, his first instinct to turn and run, to hide. But there was nowhere to go. He froze, his face a mask of shame, and waited for the inevitable lecture, the gloating, the final twist of the knife. Anthony approached him slowly, his expression not of triumph, but of a deep, quiet sadness. He saw not the monster who had humiliated him, but a broken man who had lost everything. He stopped a few feet away, the silence stretching between them, filled only by the rustle of the autumn leaves. Finally, Derek spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I don't expect you to forgive me." Anthony considered this for a moment. He thought of the anger, the hurt, the injustice. But he also thought of Arthur, and the son he had lost long before he died. "It's not about forgiveness, Derek," he said, his voice gentle. "Forgiveness is for me. What you need to worry about is for you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's about learning from your mistakes. It's about understanding that respect is something you earn, not something you inherit. It's about realizing that a man's worth isn't measured by his title or his bank account, but by his character." Derek finally looked up, his eyes swimming with unshed tears of shame and regret. He saw no hatred in Anthony's face, only a profound, disappointing pity. "I hope you do learn, Derek," Anthony finished quietly. "I truly hope you do." He turned and walked away, leaving Derek standing alone among the falling leaves, a man stripped bare of all his privilege, left with nothing but the hard, unforgiving truth of who he was. For Anthony, justice had been served, not through revenge, but through the quiet, powerful act of positive change, a testament to a legacy of integrity that had, after a long and silent winter, finally been restored. The years that followed were a quiet revolution. The encounter in the park was the last time Anthony ever saw Derek Vance. The story of the janitor who owned the company became a quiet legend within the walls of Vance Innovations, a cautionary tale whispered among new hires, a foundational myth for a new era. The company, once a glittering, cold monument to a single man's ego, had been transformed. It was no longer a shark tank, but an ecosystem, vibrant and teeming with life. The sterile silence of the past had been replaced by the energetic hum of collaboration, the sound of voices bouncing ideas off one another in open, light-filled spaces, the occasional burst of laughter echoing from a team meeting. One crisp afternoon in early spring, nearly 5 years after he had reclaimed his seat at the table, Anthony Coleman walked through the main innovation hub. His hair was more silver than black now, and the lines around his eyes were deeper, but they were lines of contentment, etched by years of quiet satisfaction. He moved with the same unhurried grace he'd had as a janitor, but now his presence was a source of warmth, not invisibility. Employees looked up and smiled as he passed, not with the strained deference they'd shown Derek, but with genuine affection and respect. He knew most of them by name, knew their projects, their passions, even the names of their children. He was not just their chairman, he was their mentor. He paused by a workstation where a young man, an intern named Leo with bright, intense eyes and a perpetual cowlick, was staring at a screen with a look of profound frustration. A complex three-dimensional architectural rendering of a community center was frozen, a mess of jagged polygons and conflicting data points. Leo was muttering to himself, running a hand through his already messy hair. Anthony watched for a moment, a gentle smile touching his lips. He saw himself in the young man's earnest struggle, saw the same spark of creative fire that had once burned so brightly in Arthur Vance. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over the desk. "The foundation seems to be arguing with the walls, Leo," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. Leo jumped, startled, then his face flushed with embarrassment as he saw who it was. "Mr. Coleman, I'm sorry I didn't see you. I'm stuck." The stress simulations keep failing. The load-bearing calculations are right. I've checked them a dozen times, but the structure just keeps collapsing on itself. Anthony leaned in, his gaze thoughtful as he studied the screen. He didn't look at the complex equations or the flashy rendering. He looked at the very bottom of the image, at the point where the building met the ground. "You're trying to force the structure to fit the design," he observed quietly. "But you haven't listened to what the ground is telling you. Your foundation is too rigid. It's not adapting to the terrain you've given it. It needs to be flexible, to distribute the weight, not just resist it." He pointed a steady finger at a single, almost invisible line of code. "If it's wrong, the whole thing is wrong, no matter how beautiful the spire is." Leo stared at the screen, then back at Anthony, his eyes wide with a dawning understanding. It was a simple observation, a fundamental principle he had overlooked in his focus on the more complex, glamorous aspects of the design. He made the adjustment, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He ran the simulation again. This time, the structure held, the lines flowing together in a perfect, stable harmony. A huge, relieved grin spread across Leo's face. He looked up at Anthony with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. "Wow," he breathed. "Thank you, Mr. Coleman. I was looking at it all wrong." He hesitated for a moment, then plunged ahead, the words tumbling out in a rush of youthful admiration. "Your story. I mean, everyone here knows it. It's so inspiring. How did you do it? How did you go from cleaning the floors to running the whole company?" Anthony's smile was warm, tinged with the wisdom of a long and eventful life. He leaned against the edge of the desk, his presence calming and paternal. He didn't see an employee. He saw the future. "I never stopped cleaning the floors, Leo," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Even when I was running the company. It's a matter of perspective." He looked around the bustling office, at the dozens of bright minds working, creating, building. "I did it by never forgetting where I came from. By understanding that the person who polishes the brass nameplate is just as important as the person whose name is on it. I did it by treating everyone with respect, no matter their position, because a company isn't a pyramid with one person at the top. It's a circle, with everyone's hands linked." He paused, his gaze becoming more introspective, as if he were looking back across the landscape of his own life. "My best friend, the man who founded this company, he had the vision. He could see the skyscraper. But I was the one who understood the importance of the bedrock. My time in the janitor's uniform wasn't a step down, it was an education. It taught me to see the cracks in the foundation before they became earthquakes. It taught me to pay attention to the small things, because that's where integrity lives." He looked back at the young intern, his eyes kind but firm. "And most importantly, I did it by remembering that true wealth is not measured in dollars, or stock prices, or the height of the building you're in. It's measured in the positive impact you have on the world, in the lives you touch, in the legacy of respect and kindness you leave behind. Build a strong foundation in your life, Leo. Build it with humility and hard work. The rest will take care of itself." He gave the young man's shoulder a gentle pat and continued his walk, leaving Leo staring after him. The technical problem solved, but a much larger, more important lesson just beginning to take root in his mind. Anthony's walk ended, as it often did, in his office. It was the same corner office on the top floor that had once been Derek's, but it was unrecognizable. The cold, intimidating furniture was gone, replaced by comfortable armchairs, shelves overflowing with books on history, engineering, and philosophy, and tables covered in blueprints for community projects the company was now funding. On one wall hung the large, black and white photograph of him and Arthur, two young men with impossible dreams, grinning in their tiny rented room. On his desk, next to a state-of-the-art computer, sat his worn, dog-eared copy of The Wealth of Nations, its spine held together with tape, a constant reminder of first principles. He walked to the massive floor, ceiling window, and looked out. It was the same breathtaking God's eye view of the city he had once spent hours cleaning from the outside, a bucket of soapy water in his hand. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange, pink, and purple. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on, a sprawling, glittering tapestry that stretched to the horizon. It was a symbol of the bright, stable future he had worked so hard to build, not just for the company, but for the thousands of people it employed. He felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, a quiet contentment that was more satisfying than any stock dividend. He had kept his promise to Arthur. He had saved their company not from bankruptcy but from its own soullessness. He had restored its integrity. He thought of his wife, Martha, and wished she could be here to see it, to see the forest they had grown from that single hopeful seed planted so long ago. He knew she would be proud. His legacy was not one of power or of wealth, but of mentorship, of building a community, of proving that a gentle hand could be stronger than an iron fist. It was the legacy of a life well lived, a quiet victory for the humble and the diligent. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, the camera of the story would pull back from his serene, reflective face. It would pan slowly, deliberately, down the gleaming glass facade of the Vance Innovations Tower, leaving Anthony alone with his thoughts and the twinkling city lights. Down, down, down it would travel, past the floors of bustling offices, past the innovation hubs, past the collaborative workspaces, all the way down to the ground floor. The lobby, once a cold, sterile cathedral of corporate might, was now warm and inviting. The harsh, white lights had been replaced with a softer, golden glow. A few employees were gathered on a comfortable sofa, laughing quietly as they finished up a project. The security guard was not a stern sentinel, but a friendly presence, reading a novel behind the desk. The atmosphere was one of quiet and of day camaraderie. The camera's final destination was the floor. The gleaming Italian marble, as reflective as a still, dark lake. It was immaculately clean, its polished surface holding a perfect upside-down image of the warm lobby and the glittering city outside. It was a mirror reflecting the company's new soul. It was a reminder of a humble beginning, of a journey that started with a mop and a bucket, with a quiet man who understood that for any structure to stand tall and reach for the sky, its foundation, the part that meets the earth, must be solid, clean, and built with pride. True worth, the final shot seemed to say, lies not in the penthouse, but in the character of the man who knows, intimately, the value of a polished floor.